Ahyok, the Apache healer, stood at the edge of her small dwelling, her eyes scanning the horizon where the desert stretched endlessly. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the sand, and the wind whispered through the sparse shrubs that clung stubbornly to life. She had lived all her life in harmony with this land, learning its ways, respecting its moods, and listening to the messages carried in the wind and the rustle of leaves. The desert was not merely a place to live, it was a teacher, a guide, and sometimes, a stern judge. On that quiet evening, her thoughts were interrupted by the approach of Taye, a young scout from her village. He was running, carrying a message that he knew would trouble her. His face was pale, and sweat streaked through the dust on his cheeks. "Ahyok," he called out, slowing as he neared her. "The council. They insist you perform the ritual. They say it is needed to bless the caravan before it crosses the desert." Ahyok's eyes narrowed. She had sensed unease for days, a subtle warning that something about this ritual was not right. She knew that the desert did not respond to human wishes blindly. Every step in its vastness had consequences, and rushing without understanding could bring hardship. She shook her head slowly and spoke firmly, her voice carrying both authority and warning. "You'll regret this. I won't obey." Tay looked at her in shock. "But the council is insistent. They fear the journey, and they fear what might happen if the ritual is not performed." Ahyok's gaze did not waver. "I understand their fear," she said calmly. "But fear alone cannot guide our actions. I have listened to the land, to the signs that it has given. This ritual, if performed without caution, could awaken something the desert has held for generations. I cannot, will not, risk that." The young scout hesitated, torn between loyalty to the council and trust in the healer he had known since childhood. Finally, he nodded, understanding her resolve, even if he did not fully grasp the depth of her intuition. "Then what will you do?" he asked quietly. "I will watch, I will prepare, and I will guide," she replied. "But I will not obey out of fear or pressure. The desert has its secrets, Tay, and we must respect them." That night, Ahyok began her preparations. Her small home, simple but filled with items of power and knowledge, came alive with quiet activity. She gathered herbs she had carefully tended, roots and leaves with properties known only to her and the healers who had come before her. She arranged them in bundles, carefully noting which combinations might bring protection, clarity, or endurance. Small pouches of powdered plants were tied with strips of cloth, and the scent of sage and cedar filled the air. As she worked, she reflected on the teachings of her ancestors. They had always emphasized that wisdom was not simply following orders, it was understanding, observing, and knowing when to act and when to refrain. The desert had been their teacher for countless generations, showing that patience and caution could mean the difference between survival and misfortune. She thought of her grandmother, who had once told her, "The land speaks if you listen, Ahyok, and it always remembers those who act with respect." The night passed slowly, with Ahyok moving silently through her tasks. Outside, the desert was alive with sounds, the whispering of the wind across dunes, the distant cry of an owl, and the soft shuffle of creatures that thrived in the shadows. She stepped outside occasionally to listen, to feel the vibrations of the land beneath her feet. Every sound, every subtle change in the air, carried meaning, and every signal seemed to confirm her unease about the council's request. At dawn, she set out along the narrow trails that wound through the desert. Her goal was not rebellion, it was understanding. She wanted to discover if the danger she felt was real, and if so, how it could be avoided. The village watched as she disappeared into the sands, some with hope, some with doubt. The council members exchanged anxious glances, uneasy that the healer had chosen to take action into her own hands rather than comply with their instructions. The journey was not easy. The desert, beautiful as it was, could be relentless. The sun rose fiercely, heating the sand and making the air shimmer. Ahiok moved steadily, her steps deliberate, avoiding the fatigue that could slow her or cloud her judgment. She paused to examine the tracks of animals, foxes, rabbits, and the occasional coyote reading the story of their movements. Each track told her about the balance of the ecosystem, the scarcity of water, and where potential dangers might lie. By midday, she reached a series of rocky outcrops that formed a small canyon. The walls were lined with carvings, symbols left by those who had lived in harmony with the desert before her. She traced her fingers over the etchings, feeling a connection to those who had walked these paths long ago. Their knowledge was embedded in the land, in every curve of the stone and every whisper of wind that moved through the canyon. Here, Ahiok sensed the desert's deeper secrets, the power it held, and the consequences that could follow when humans acted without understanding. She set up a small camp, taking care to leave no trace of her presence. She prepared a simple meal, relying on dried fruits, seeds, and water carried in a clay flask. As she ate, she reflected on the stories passed down in her family, of healers who had guided travelers, warned of dangers, and sometimes refused to comply when doing so would bring harm. She understood now that her decision to refuse the counsel was part of a long tradition, a continuation of wisdom that valued life and balance over blind obedience. Hours passed, and the sun began its descent, casting the canyon in deep shadows. Ahiok observed the wind patterns, the shifting sands, and the subtle changes in temperature. She noticed signs of recent travelers' footprints that did not match any animal she knew, and discarded items that suggested someone had been caught off guard by the desert's challenges. These small discoveries confirmed her suspicions. The ritual demanded by the council could indeed have unforeseen consequences. As night fell, she lit a small fire, careful to keep it contained and respectful of the surroundings. The flickering light illuminated her face as she meditated on the day's experiences. The desert, in its vastness, seemed to respond to her presence. Quiet, but aware. She could feel the weight of responsibility, not just to the village, but to the land itself. Every action she took was a choice between harmony and disruption. When she finally lay down to rest, the stars overhead were bright and innumerable, each one a witness to her resolve. She thought of the caravan the council wanted to bless, imagining the travelers moving across the dunes without knowledge of the hidden challenges ahead. She made a silent promise. If danger threatened them, she would act, but she would do so with knowledge, not fear. The desert's secrets were not to be rushed or commanded, they were to be understood, respected, and honored. The wind carried whispers through the canyon, almost as if the land itself acknowledged her decision. Ahiok closed her eyes, knowing that the path ahead was uncertain. But she felt ready. She had the wisdom of her ancestors, the lessons of the land, and her own intuition to guide her. Whatever the council demanded, whatever expectations weighed on her, she would move with awareness and courage. The desert had tested her resolve, and she had passed its quiet challenge. By morning, she would face the council, prepared to speak the truth she had learned. She would tell them that obedience, without understanding, could lead to regret. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of peace, listening to the soft rustle of the desert night, and knowing that her choice, firm, deliberate, and respectful, was the right one. The desert held its secrets still, vast and unchanging. But Ahiok understood a little more of its wisdom than she had the day before, and that understanding would guide her through the trials to come. Ahiok returned to the village at dawn, the first light of the sun painting the sand in soft gold and pink hues. Her footsteps were steady, her mind alert, and her heart calm. The villagers were beginning their daily routines, tending to livestock, gathering water, and preparing for the journey of the caravan that was scheduled to cross the desert. As she approached the council's meeting place, whispers spread quickly. Some people looked at her with curiosity, others with concern. They had heard of her journey and the time she had spent in the desert alone. The council members, seated in a semicircle on the sandy ground, rose as she entered. Their expressions were a mixture of respect and unease. They had insisted on the ritual, believing it essential for the safety of the travelers. Now, they faced the healer, who had refused their command, and returned, with knowledge they could not yet see. Ahiok spoke clearly, without fear. I have seen what the desert holds. The ritual you asked for, if performed without understanding, could have unintended consequences. The land is not a tool for our wishes. It is alive, aware, and its power must be treated with respect. A murmur ran through the council. Some members shifted uneasily. One elder, a man named Kaya, spoke cautiously. But Ahiok, we feared the journey would bring harm to the caravan. If not for the ritual, what protection do they have? Ahiok met his gaze with steady calm. Protection comes from knowledge and preparation, not rituals performed blindly. I have walked the paths they will follow. I have studied the signs of the desert and prepared methods to guide them safely. With care, with understanding, they will reach their destination unharmed. The council fell silent, absorbing her words. Ahiok continued, explaining what she had seen. The tracks of predators, the patterns of shifting sand, the hidden wells of water that could sustain life in emergencies, and the places where sudden storms could arise. Each detail she shared was simple, practical, and rooted in observation. It was not magic or superstition. It was knowledge gained from listening to the land itself. Some villagers looked skeptical, still clinging to old fears, while others nodded in understanding. Tay, the young scout, stood beside her, his eyes wide with respect. He had accompanied her on parts of her journey and had seen firsthand how carefully she read the signs of the desert. Ahiok proposed a new plan. We will guide the caravan with careful steps. We will show them where to rest, where water can be found, and where the path is safest. If danger arises, we will be ready to act not because of a ritual, but because of wisdom and preparation. The council deliberated, weighing tradition against practical knowledge. Finally, they agreed. The village would follow Ahiok's guidance, trusting in her experience and the lessons she had learned from the desert. Relief, mixed with admiration, spread through the villagers. Many realized that her refusal to obey was not defiance but a form of protection and foresight. The caravan set out the next morning, led by Ahiok and a small group of volunteers who had learned from her how to read the signs of the desert. The travelers moved carefully, following the paths she indicated and observing the subtle changes in wind, sand, and light. At first, the journey seemed routine, but soon, the desert revealed its challenges. A sudden heat wave made the sand shimmer and the air heavy. Dunes that had appeared easy to cross earlier now seemed formidable, and some travelers grew anxious. Ahiok remained calm, moving at a steady pace. She taught the travelers to walk during cooler hours, to rest in shaded areas, and to ration water carefully. She showed them how to recognize signs of fatigue and dehydration, using simple herbal remedies she had prepared. The travelers began to trust her guidance, seeing that her methods worked better than fear or rituals ever could. One evening, as they approached a narrow pass between high dunes, Ahiok noticed signs that the land had been disturbed recently. Footprints and remnants of a small campsite suggested that others had passed through, possibly caught unprepared by the desert's sudden changes. She paused, studying the tracks carefully. The travelers waited in silence, sensing her concentration. We must take the pass slowly, she said. The wind and sand have shifted. If we move too quickly, we could be trapped or lose our way. Step by step, Ahiok led them through the pass. She demonstrated how to find solid footing, how to navigate using the sun and shadows, and how to keep spirits calm during moments of tension. Her patience and careful teaching made a deep impression on the travelers, who had initially feared the unknown but now felt a growing confidence. During the journey, Ahiok also shared stories from her life and the teachings of her ancestors. She spoke of the importance of observing, listening, and respecting the natural world. She reminded them that strength is not only in action but also in understanding. The travelers began to see the desert not as an enemy, but as a teacher with lessons to offer to those willing to learn. At one point, a sandstorm arose suddenly, sweeping across the caravan's path. The winds howled, and the air became thick with blowing sand. Many travelers were frightened, unsure of where to go or how to protect themselves. Ahiok acted quickly, guiding everyone to a small canyon she had scouted earlier. Using natural barriers and her knowledge of the terrain, she helped them shelter safely. She used herbs to soothe coughing and irritation caused by the sand, and her calm presence reassured the group. When the storm passed, the travelers emerged grateful and enlightened. They had learned firsthand that knowledge and preparation could overcome fear and danger more effectively than rituals performed blindly. The desert had tested them, but under Ahiok's guidance, they had endured. By the end of the journey, the caravan reached its destination without harm. Villagers and travelers alike praised Ahiok's wisdom and courage. The council acknowledged that her refusal to obey the initial command had not been defiance but an act of careful judgment and protection. They recognized that respecting the land, understanding its signs, and acting with awareness were far more powerful than any ritual performed without thought. Ahiok stood once again on a dune, watching the sun set over the desert. The golden light stretched across the sand, revealing the beauty, harshness, and quiet strength of the land she had always loved. She reflected on the journey, on the lessons learned by both herself and the travelers, and on the importance of listening to one's intuition. The desert had tested her, revealed its secrets, and rewarded patience and respect. She realized that courage was not only in taking action but also in saying no when necessary. True wisdom came from understanding the consequences of every choice and acting in harmony with the world around her. The villagers had learned this lesson too, gaining a new respect for the land and for those who understood its rhythms. That night, as the stars appeared once more in the clear desert sky, Ahiok felt a deep sense of peace. The desert remained vast and mysterious, holding secrets that might never be fully known. But she also knew that she, and those who traveled with her, had gained something priceless: knowledge, awareness, and the confidence to move carefully and wisely through the world. In the days that followed, Ahiok shared her experiences and teachings with the village. Children listened in wonder as she told of sandstorms, hidden paths, and the signs of life in the desert. Young travelers practiced reading tracks, finding water, and understanding the subtle changes in the environment. The villagers learned that the world was full of lessons, waiting for those willing to pay attention. Ahiok's decision to refuse the ritual had sparked a transformation in the village. People no longer relied solely on tradition or fear. They learned to think, observe, and act with understanding. And while the desert kept its deepest secrets, it had given them something equally valuable: the knowledge that respect, courage, and careful observation could guide them safely through life's challenges. The story of Ahiok, the healer who had said, "You'll regret this, I won't obey," spread across the region. Her wisdom became a beacon, reminding everyone that true guidance comes from knowledge, patience, and harmony with the world around them. And in the quiet desert, beneath the endless sky, the land watched over those who had learned to listen, offering both challenge and reward in equal measure.